Hello. One of the coolest things to ever appear in Warhammer 40,000 is, in my opinion, the Dreadnought. A nigh unstoppable walking tank that can lay down withering fire and smash through virtually any enemy. Taking cues from games that predate even Warhammer, the Dreadnoughts of Rogue Trader were initially described as phenomenally powerful suits of armour that granted their wearers almost impossible levels of damage resistance and damage output. In time, that would change, as Dreadnoughts became walking coffins in which were entombed ancient, mortally wounded Space Marines who still wanted a chance to serve their Emperor. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today we're exploring the history of the Dreadnought. Even back in the earliest days of Warhammer 40,000, the Dreadnoughts were brutal behemoths that stood tall alongside Orcs and Eldar and Space Marines. They were always deadly additions to any fighting force, but in the lore, they occupied a slightly different place. In my recent video about the Space Marine Terminators, I talked about the development of those suits of tactical Dreadnought armour, but I didn't go into the earlier history, the DNA that is deeply entwined with that of the Dreadnought. And that's because we're going to explore how the Dreadnought first arrived in the 41st millennium and how its evolution diverged from that of the Terminators. Many of the types of armour described in the equipment section offer almost complete immunity, at least from the common weapons. However, there is one kind of armour which is even more powerful than any of these: the Dreadnought suit, also known as battle suits, battle armour, mech suits, and mech armour. These suits are quite literally one-man tanks, and it would, perhaps, be better to think of them as small mobile vehicles than as normal armour. A man or other creature wearing a Dreadnought suit is a force to be reckoned with, quite capable of taking on 20 times his own number of ordinary troops. There was no such thing as a Terminator when Rogue Trader was first published, but the description of the Dreadnought in that book, well, it sits somewhere between what we would recognise today as the heavily armoured squads of Marines and the solo bipedal vehicle that has become the Dreadnought. But I am getting ahead of myself. Before we can understand the Dreadnoughts of Rogue Trader, we need to understand a game that came out before Rogue Trader even existed, before even Warhammer Fantasy existed. Because in 1980, a game would be published that would be pivotal for the future of Citadel miniatures, and it was created by that company's co-founder, Brian Ansell. During a period of estrangement between Games Workshop and Ansell, he returned to his old friends at Tabletop Games, a small publisher and game store based in Nottingham that had also released early efforts from Richard Halliwell and Rick Priestley, such as Reaper and Combat 3000. In Laserburn, Ansell would explore Western-style skirmish warfare in a pulp sci-fi setting, drawing on tropes and ideas that had been popularised in science fiction writing and cinema for many years. Concepts like power armour, which, though not invented by Robert Heinlein, had been popularised by his Starship Troopers novel, would be a key feature of Laserburn, and they, along with bolters, power weapons, jetpacks, and plenty more common ideas, would be picked up and used later in the decade when Rick Priestley wrote 40k. They were also joined, of course, by Dreadnought armour. If power armour has replaced the light tank, the Dreadnought has replaced the main battle tank. Toughened armour plate with an immensely powerful exoskeleton, not available to the general public. The name Dreadnought is owed to a class of battleship, which itself is derived from the first of its kind, the Royal Navy's HMS Dreadnought, launched in 1906. There had been many Royal Navy vessels that used that name before this new ship, dating all the way back to 1553, and its meaning quite literally suggests that those ships fear nothing. But it wasn't until the all-big gun and steam-powered HMS Dreadnought took to the waves in 06 that the name became more than just a name. From then on, the most powerful category of naval vessel, one that carried an unprecedentedly large armament, would be a symbol of power for the navies of the world. So not only is it a very cool-sounding word, but it also means a class of war machine that carries the heaviest weapons, takes the biggest beatings, and commands the most respect. Exactly what the Dreadnoughts of 40k would later embody. The Dreadnoughts of Laserburn are the ancestors of both the Terminators and the Dreadnoughts of 40k. They share a description with the Rogue Trader era Dreadnought, of being a suit of powered armor, extremely powerful, but which had to be donned before battle every single time. Rogue Trader would take things further as it expanded its world building, going into the details about how they are different, how they are built, how different suits of armor can exist across different chapters of Space Marines even. Dreadnought suits are used by many races, although their size and general appearance is similar regardless of origin. Suits are complex and rarely reliable. Constant battlefield repairs and improvisation of spare parts means that few suits are alike. Imperial battle armor is fairly common amongst the ranks of the Imperial forces, Marine chapters occasionally having several suits. Armies have a pool of up to a half dozen suits in various states of repair. In the transition of Dreadnoughts from Laserburn to Rogue Trader, they also picked up some other influences. Japanese science fiction had long been interested in the concept of huge humanoid tank suits, with stories like Genshin Ryoku Jinzo Ningen or Atomic Power Android, featuring piloted mecha suits as early as 1948. In more recent times, games from the FASA Corporation, like 1984's Battle Droids and the subsequent 1985 renamed re-release Battletech, would popularise the huge walking battle mech concept at Western gaming tables. Still, the 40k version of these ideas retained some of those early Laserburn roots, and it wouldn't be until the arrival of the Terminators that it would fully cast off those aspects of its lore. In pretty short order, we would get to see the Dreadnought armour in the metal. White Dwarf 95 showcased the Bob Naismith design miniatures. Interchangeable limbs allowed for a variety of loadouts, including different armaments like single or double bolters, standard or wide torsos, and standard or short legs. Short-legged wide boys represent. Soon enough, we'd also get to see other types of Dreadnought too. There were the Kev Adams designed Space Orc Dreadnoughts, a mighty fine kit with its variable options. Especially fun was that you could buy an expansion set of limbs and body parts that allowed you to build a double tall Dreadnought with arms all over the place. And the Eldar also received a Dreadnought as designed by Jez Goodwin. There were 3 loadout options available for this spindly lad: the Banshee, the Warcry, and the War Demon. In White Dwarf issue 100, Chapter Approved expanded on the roles, rules, and options available to Dreadnoughts, even going so far as to replace some of the material that had been published in the first supplement for Warhammer 40,000, the Book of the Astronomicon. Though the subject was originally covered in Warhammer 40,000 Rulebook, page 119, further development in the field of powered armour and recently acquired intelligence reports on its use by various races have necessitated a thorough reassessment of the most powerful type of personal armour, the Dreadnought suit. As well as exploring Dreadnought construction and control in more detail, the 3 main classes of Imperial Dreadnought are introduced with some fantastic exploded views, as illustrated by H, the Contemptor, Deridio, and Furibundus, affectionately known as Chuck, Eddie, and Fury. Considerably more options were introduced into choosing and equipping your Dreadnought, with all of the miniature build options incorporated, as well as onboard tools like ejector seats and targeters. You could even spend more points to ensure that your pilot had more sophisticated control of their Dreadnought, ranging from the cheapest and least effective option of basically a screen and a joystick, or a fast and efficient spinal link, or even, the best of all, a mind impulse unit that allowed the driver to control the suit as if it was their own body. There's loads of amazing art for all of these different types of Dreadnoughts, but my favourite bit of the article are the extensive tables that basically allow the suits to be blown apart piece by piece over the course of the battle. Of course, that's only if you get lucky enough to actually damage them in the first place. Also worth a quick note, the Fantasy and 40k supplement Warhammer Siege talked about Siege Dreadnoughts. And in case you've been wondering, it also made clear that Dreadnoughts and large dinosaurs are about the same size. With the release of Realm of Chaos Slaves to Darkness in 1988, the renegade forces of the Ruinous Powers would get access to their own Dreadnoughts, and a suitably HR Giga-esque model was sculpted by Alan Perry to let you field them on the tabletop. Of course, these were not the only Chaos Dreadnoughts that you might encounter during this era. In fact, I would go so far as to wager that by 1990, a sizable portion of young gamers would cite one particular miniature as perhaps the most iconic model available in 40k, and you would find it in a game called Space Crusade. The sci-fi counterpart to HeroQuest, Space Crusade was a family-friendly board game released by MB Games and featuring the 40k setting and a load of Citadel plastic. Just as HeroQuest had its big bad monster, the Gargoyle, Space Crusade would feature the Dreadnought, a multi-part model from which you'd unclip weapons as it took damage. The design of the miniature didn't really look anything like the Imperium or Chaos Dreadnoughts that we would see in 40k. Instead, it was far more robotic in aesthetic. That's not too surprising though, given that it drew on the design of Ed 209, the rival police robot in the original 1987 RoboCop movie. A supplement, Mission Dreadnought, would see players dealing with a Dreadnought factory, and the even more deadly heavy Dreadnoughts that were being manufactured there. The rulebook shared some background on the names and configurations of several different Chaos Dreadnoughts, and in the box you'd find another regular Dreadnought, as well as the parts to make the monstrous Mark 9 Dominator or Mark 10 Abomination class Dreadnoughts. The standard Space Crusade Dreadnoughts, dubbed the Mark 7s, would even find themselves produced at a smaller scale. You could take them and the Chaos Androids in your Chaos armies for the game Epic. With issue 146 of White Dwarf in 1992, a revised background for the Dreadnought would be fully canonized into the 40k setting. Terminators had been part of the 40k setting for a couple of years now, and they had essentially taken over that role as the heavy armoured premium power suit. There was no need for the Dreadnoughts to also just be a suit of armour anymore. In order to be relevant, in order to have something unique about them, the Dreadnoughts would have to change. And they would do that by becoming living tombs. Dreadnoughts are huge fighting machines, most standing 2 or 3 times the height of a man. Although they could be mistaken for robots or very large fighting suits at first, they are, in fact, a unique symbiosis of man and machine. A Dreadnought contains a single creature whose body lies curled within its carapace, and whose nervous system is directly connected to the pumps and hydraulics which form the armor's muscles, making it move and perform actions with the ease of a living creature. Once a living creature is interred inside Dreadnought armor, it can never leave, and is destined for a life of endless battle until its walking tomb is destroyed. In this article, the idea of Space Marines interring mortally wounded old ones into a Dreadnought sarcophagus is expounded upon. Updated damage tables were provided for the Space Marine, Eldar, Orc, and Chaos Dreadnoughts, as well as the Tyranid Screamer Killer, the equivalent of a biological Dreadnought. From there, the various Dreadnoughts would develop further in line with their own factions. In the second edition of the game, the Space Marine Dreadnought is presented as a haunting mirror of the quasi-dead Emperor that they fight for, as these powerful, lumbering sarcophagi carry nearly dead Space Marines back into battle once again. This would be where we would get the introduction of legends like Bjorn the Fell-Handed, as well as a new range of chunky models for each of the major Marine chapters. These absolutely stunning kneeless walkers would only serve to enamor an entire new generation of gamers to the brilliant big boys that are the Space Marine Dreadnoughts. And yet, fascinating though that continued evolution is, I am all out of time for this particular video. If you would like to support my work, check out patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery, where you'll find more Warhammer history, articles, interviews, all sorts of fun stuff. And it also is hugely important to enabling me to continue to research and document all of this amazing history. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.